appears that there was a coronavirus pandemic in 1889. Yeah, you heard me right. That's like 130 years ago. As I'm sure you know, coronaviruses are a family of RNA viruses. They include the viruses that cause COVID-19, SARS, MERS, and a handful of other viruses that together account for about 15% of common cold cases. But one among that small handful may not have started out as a common cold. Okay, so human history records a flu pandemic every few decades. But you may ask, what does this have to do with coronaviruses? Well, let's talk about the 1889 Russian flu pandemic. And that might be a bit of a misnomer, because there certainly was a pandemic from 1889 to like 1890. But research is starting to suggest that the pathogen involved might not have been a flu. The research now points to a salient theory that the 1889 pandemic may in fact have been caused by human coronavirus OC43, which causes a mild respiratory infection at most it affects today. So, how could it have been responsible for an estimated 1 million deaths between 1889 and 1890? Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go over the evidence that points towards OC43 having caused the 1889 pandemic. Okay, you're gonna have to bear with me. OC43 is actually a subspecies of beta coronavirus 1 alongside the modern-day bovine, i.e. cow-infecting coronavirus. When researchers in the 2000s used molecular clock analyses to determine the time of their divergence, they concluded that a zoonotic leap occurred from cattle to humans around the year 1890. Now, does that time frame ring any bells? So, our theory holds that the jump from cows to humans of OC43 precipitated the 1889 pandemic. But now to circle back to the earlier point, if OC43 is so innocuous today, how did it end up killing 1 million people in the 19th century? Well, OC43 today isn't the same virus as it was 130 years ago. See, a virus doesn't really have any interest in killing you. All it really needs you for is to replicate itself and spread itself onto a few new hosts. Killing you is often kind of counterproductive in this regard. So, over time, viruses can evolve to be less deadly to their hosts. Also, host species tend to develop better immune responses to their pathogens over time, protecting them from mortality. And that's not all of the evidence that OC43 was the pathogen behind the 1889 pandemic. Patients infected by that so-called Russian flu displayed symptoms suspiciously similar to coronavirus infections, including loss of taste and smell. Victims of the 1889 pandemic also displayed neurological symptoms, which is also a bit of a hallmark of some coronaviruses today. And OC43, even though it's a mild cold, has been known to infect nervous tissue in humans. Anyways, I should emphasize that the view that OC43 was the cause of the 1889 pandemic is still largely conjecture. There's no real consensus on it. So what do you think?